Chapter 1. The Silent Surrender. Here's something nobody tells you until it's almost too late. You've been bleeding energy your entire life, and the worst part? You never even noticed the wound. Every single time you jumped to defend yourself when someone questioned your choices, every moment you spent crafting the perfect comeback in your head, 3 hours after a conversation ended, every night you replayed that one comment over and over, trying to decode what they really meant. You were giving away something precious. You were handing over your power, gift-wrapped, to people who probably forgot about the interaction 5 minutes later. And here's the thing that makes it even more brutal. It didn't feel wrong. It felt necessary. It felt like you were standing up for yourself, like you were being authentic, like you were doing the right thing. But look at where that got you. Look at how many hours you've lost to mental arguments with people who aren't even thinking about you anymore. Look at how exhausted you feel after a day where nothing particularly dramatic happened, but somehow you're drained anyway. That's not strength. That's a slow leak that's been running so long you've learned to live with it. Most people go their whole lives never questioning this pattern. They accept it as normal. That's just how life is, they tell themselves. People say things. You respond. People challenge you. You defend. That's what communication looks like. But what if I told you that's not communication? That's just reaction on autopilot. What if the strongest thing you could ever do isn't saying the right thing at the right time, but knowing when to say absolutely nothing at all? There's an old teaching passed down through generations of wisdom keepers that goes something like this. The battlefield you think you're fighting on doesn't actually exist. The real war isn't happening in conversations, in conflicts, in those moments when someone says something that makes your blood pressure spike. The real war is happening inside you, in that split second between hearing something and choosing how to let it affect you. That's where everything is won or lost. Not out there, in here. And the moment you truly understand that, really absorb it into your bones, something fundamental shifts. You start to see that all this time you've been fighting battles that were never yours to fight. You've been defending positions that didn't need defending. You've been proving points that were never worth proving. And in doing all of that, you handed control of your internal state to whoever happened to say something that triggered you that day. Think about yesterday. Actually, let's go smaller. Think about the last 3 hours. How many times did something someone said or did pull your attention away from what you were doing? How many times did your mind wander into analysis mode, trying to figure out what they meant? Whether you should respond, what you should say if you do respond. And while all of that was happening, where were you? Not present, not focused, not in control. You were somewhere else, trapped in a scenario that already ended, with someone who's probably already moved on. This is the hidden cost that nobody calculates. We think reaction is just a momentary thing. Something happens, you respond, it's over. But that's not how it actually works. Reaction doesn't end when the moment ends. It follows you. It takes up residence in your mind. It replays itself over and over, slightly different each time, each version pulling a little more of your energy away from what actually matters. Let me paint you a picture. Someone says something to you, doesn't even have to be particularly offensive, just something slightly off, something that creates a tiny bit of friction. Maybe it's a passive-aggressive comment disguised as concern. Maybe it's a joke that lands wrong. Maybe it's just their tone. And in that moment, something clicks in your brain. Not dramatically, just a quiet shift. And suddenly, you're not fully present anymore. Your body is still there, going through the motions, but your mind is gone. It's back in that moment, analyzing every word, every inflection, every possible meaning. You start building responses, not just one, multiple versions. The calm one, the firm one, the witty one that puts them in their place without being obvious about it. You rehearse them, you refine them, you imagine how the conversation would have gone if you'd said this instead of that. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. It feels productive. It feels like you're processing something important, like you're preparing yourself, like you're learning from the experience, but you're not. You're just feeding energy into something that's already over, letting it grow bigger in your mind than it ever was in reality. Meanwhile, hours pass, maybe days, and that interaction is still with you, still taking up space, still demanding your attention. You're in the shower, and there it is. You're trying to fall asleep, and there it is. You're in a completely different conversation with a completely different person, and somehow, there it is again, coloring how you interpret what's being said now. This is what happens when you don't control your reactions. This is what happens when you let every comment, every situation, every minor friction point pull you out of your center. You end up living in a scattered state, your awareness divided across dozens of moments that are already finished, your energy spread so thin that there's barely anything left for the present moment. And the truly maddening part? The person who made that comment probably doesn't remember it. They've moved on. They're living their life completely unbothered while you're still carrying the weight of something they said 3 days ago without even thinking about it. You're letting them control your internal state, and they don't even know they're doing it. This is the pattern most people never break. They spend their entire lives in this reactive state, constantly adjusting themselves based on external input, constantly defending, constantly explaining, constantly trying to manage how others see them, and it's exhausting. Not in an obvious way, not like running a marathon or working a double shift. It's a quiet exhaustion, a slow drain that happens so gradually you don't notice it until you're running on empty. But here's where it gets interesting, because buried inside this pattern, there's a choice most people never realize they have. It's not obvious. It's not advertised. In fact, most of the world operates as if this choice doesn't exist. But it does. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The choice is this. You don't have to react. You genuinely, truly, fundamentally do not have to react to everything that comes your way. Not every comment requires a response. Not every situation demands your involvement. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. And here's the part that sounds almost too simple to be powerful. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing at all. But let's be real for a second. That sounds easy when you're reading about it, when you're thinking about it in the abstract. It sounds completely different when you're in the moment, when someone's just said something that hit a nerve, when every cell in your body is screaming at you to say something, do something, prove something. In that moment, doing nothing feels impossible. It feels like weakness. It feels like letting them win. Except that's the trick. That's the lie that keeps this pattern running. Because there is no them winning when you're the only one still playing the game. There's no victory for them to claim when you simply don't participate. And this is where the real power lives. Not in having the perfect response, but in understanding that most situations don't need your response at all. Think about the strongest people you know, not the loudest ones, not the ones who always have something to say, the actually strong ones, the ones who seem unshakable. Have you noticed how they move through conflict? They don't avoid it, but they also don't get sucked into every little thing. They have this quality, this presence, that's hard to describe, but impossible to miss. They're not reactive. They're not defensive. They're just steady. That steadiness doesn't come from having thick skin or not caring what people think. It comes from understanding something fundamental about how control actually works. It comes from recognizing that your power doesn't live in your ability to respond to everything. It lives in your ability to choose what you respond to. And that choice, that selectiveness, creates a different way of existing in the world. When you stop reacting to everything, something strange starts to happen. People notice, not always consciously, but they feel it. There's a shift in how they interact with you. Some people will test it, pushing a little harder to see if they can still get a reaction out of you. Others will become more respectful, more careful, because they sense you're not someone who's easily pulled in. And both of those responses tell you the same thing. The dynamic has changed. You're no longer operating on terms that were set for you. You're setting your own. This isn't about being cold or distant. This isn't about shutting people out or refusing to engage with life. It's about being intentional. It's about recognizing that your energy, your attention, your peace, these are finite resources. And when you give them away freely to anyone who happens to say something that triggers you, you end up with nothing left for what actually matters. There's a phrase that captures this perfectly: not my circus, not my monkeys. And while it sounds dismissive, there's real wisdom in it. Because most of what pulls you into reaction isn't actually your problem to solve. It's someone else's perspective, someone else's issue, someone else's need for validation or control. And you can acknowledge that without taking it on. You can recognize it without absorbing it. You can let it exist without letting it affect you. But here's where most people get stuck. They hear this idea, this concept of not reacting, and they think it means suppressing emotion. They think it means pretending they don't feel things. And that's not it at all. You can feel everything. You should feel everything. The anger, the frustration, the hurt, all of it is valid. But feeling it doesn't mean you have to act on it. And that's the distinction most people never make. Your emotions are information. They're signals telling you something about yourself, about your boundaries, about what matters to you. But they're not commands. They don't dictate your behavior unless you let them. And when you create even the smallest space between feeling something and acting on it, everything changes. That space is where your freedom lives. In that tiny gap between stimulus and response, you have a choice. And that choice, repeated over time, builds something most people spend their whole lives searching for: control. Not control over other people, not control over every situation, but control over yourself, control over your state, control over where your energy goes and what gets to affect you. This is what the ancient teachers understood. This is what they spent their lives trying to communicate. That real strength isn't about dominating others or winning arguments or always having the last word. Real strength is about mastering yourself, about staying grounded when everything around you is chaotic, about maintaining your center when the world is trying to pull you in every direction. And once you start practicing this, once you start catching yourself before the reaction takes over, once you start choosing which situations deserve your energy, you begin to notice something. Life gets quieter. Not boring, not empty, but quieter. The constant mental noise starts to fade. The endless internal dialogue about what people meant and how you should respond and whether you handled things right. It all starts to settle. And in that quietness, you find something you didn't even realize you'd lost. Yourself. The version of you that isn't constantly adjusting based on external input. The version that knows what it stands for and doesn't need to prove it. The version that can sit with silence and discomfort without needing to fill it with words or explanations or justifications. That version of you is still in there. It's been there the whole time, just buried under layers of reaction and defense and unnecessary engagement. And the path to finding it again isn't complicated. It doesn't require a complete life overhaul or years of meditation or moving to a mountain somewhere. It starts with one simple decision. The next time something triggers you, before you respond, pause, just for a second. And in that pause, ask yourself one question. Does this actually need my energy? Most of the time, the answer will be no. And that's when you practice the most powerful skill you'll ever learn, letting it go, not suppressing it, not pretending it didn't happen, just acknowledging it and choosing not to feed it, choosing not to give it more power than it deserves, choosing to keep your energy for yourself instead of bleeding it out into situations that will drain you and give nothing back. This is where the journey begins, not with big dramatic changes, but with small, consistent choices, with catching yourself mid-reaction and pulling back, with noticing when you're about to explain yourself unnecessarily and choosing silence instead, with recognizing when a situation is trying to pull you in and deciding it's not worth the cost. Each time you make that choice, you're taking something back. You're reclaiming a piece of yourself that you've been giving away. And over time, those pieces add up. They rebuild something that's been eroded by years of reactive living. They create a foundation of stability that nothing outside you can shake. Chapter 2. The Explanation Trap. Let's talk about something you probably do multiple times a day without even realizing it. Explaining yourself when nobody actually asked for an explanation. And I'm not talking about the necessary kind, the kind where someone genuinely needs clarity, or where your explanation actually serves a purpose. I'm talking about the automatic, almost compulsive need to justify your choices, your decisions, your thoughts, your feelings to people who frankly don't need to understand them. Here's how it usually plays out. You make a decision. Could be anything. Doesn't matter how big or small. Maybe you decide to leave a job or skip a social event or change your routine or just do something differently than you used to. And before anyone even questions it, before anyone even seems confused, you're already building your case. You're already lining up your reasons, preparing your defense, getting ready to explain why this makes sense, why it's the right call, why they should see it the way you see it. And then someone makes a comment. Not even a direct challenge, just a comment, a raised eyebrow, a really, with a certain tone, a casual, I don't know if I'd do that, thrown into conversation, and boom, you're off. The explanation pours out. You're walking them through your thought process, giving them context they didn't ask for, making sure they understand every angle you considered before arriving at your decision. But here's the question nobody asks. Why? Why do you feel the need to do this? Because let me tell you what's actually happening. In that moment, you're not just communicating, you're seeking validation, you're trying to get them to agree with you, to see things your way, to confirm that you made the right choice, and in doing that, you've just handed them something incredibly valuable. The power to determine whether you feel good about your own decision. Think about that for a second. You made a choice based on your own reasoning, your own priorities, your own understanding of your life. But the moment you start explaining it to someone else, hoping they'll validate it, you've made their understanding a requirement for your own peace. You've put your sense of being right, being justified, being okay with your decision into their hands. And that's a dangerous place to put it. Because here's what most people don't realize. People don't misunderstand you in a vacuum. They don't interpret what you say or do from some neutral, objective place. They filter everything through their own experiences, their own beliefs, their own fears, their own expectations, their own limitations. What they see when they look at you isn't just you, it's you filtered through everything they already are. And that means something really important. No amount of explanation guarantees they'll get it. You can choose your words perfectly. You can lay out your logic step by step. You can anticipate every question and address it before they even ask. You can explain yourself in 10 different ways, each one clearer than the last. And still, they might not see what you're trying to show them, not because you failed to explain it well enough, but because their lens isn't built to see it. This is where people waste years of their lives. They operate under this assumption that if they just explain things better, more clearly, more patiently, eventually people will understand. Eventually it'll click. Eventually they'll see it the way you see it. But the truth is, often they won't. And the more energy you pour into trying to force that understanding, the less you have left for everything else. I want you to think about how this feels over time. Because it's not just one conversation, it's pattern. It becomes this ongoing thing where you're constantly anticipating misunderstandings before they even happen. You start rehearsing explanations in your head. You overthink every word you're going to use, every phrase, trying to craft it in a way that can't possibly be misinterpreted. And slowly, without you even noticing it, you stop speaking freely. You start speaking defensively. You're not sharing your thoughts anymore. You're protecting them. You're not communicating. You're preventing. Every sentence comes with a built-in defense mechanism, every statement carefully worded to avoid giving anyone a reason to question you. And that's exhausting. Not in a dramatic, obvious way, but in this slow, creeping way that wears you down, without you fully understanding why you're so tired all the time. There's also something else happening that's even more subtle. The more you explain yourself unnecessarily, the more you teach people that you need to. You create this expectation that your decisions, your choices, your actions all come with justification attached. And once that expectation is established, it becomes really hard to step away from it. Because now, when you don't explain something, it feels like something's missing. People notice, they ask, they press, and you feel this pressure to fill that gap, even when you know deep down that you don't owe anyone that explanation. But here's where it gets interesting, because there's another way to move through this. There's a different approach that most people never consider because it feels too simple, maybe even uncomfortable at first. Instead of trying to control how people see you, instead of managing their perception through endless explanation, you just stop. You make your decision, you act on it, and you let it stand on its own. No justification, no defense, no building a case for why it makes sense. And when someone questions it, when someone seems confused, when someone makes that comment that would normally trigger a 20-minute explanation, you just acknowledge it and move on. Yeah, I decided to go this direction. That's it. No breakdown of every factor you considered, no walking them through your reasoning, no trying to get them to agree. Just a simple statement of fact, and then silence. That silence is uncomfortable at first. I'm not going to pretend it's not. Because your brain is trained to fill that space. It's trained to jump in with explanation, with justification, with all the reasons why what you're doing makes sense. But if you can sit with that discomfort, if you can resist that urge even briefly, something powerful happens. You realize that the sky doesn't fall. The person on the other end doesn't combust. The conversation doesn't collapse. Life just continues, and most of the time, the other person accepts it and moves on much faster than you expected. Because the truth is, people don't actually need to understand everything you do. They might be curious, they might have opinions, but their understanding isn't required for you to live your life. And once you experience that, once you see that you can make choices without needing everyone to validate them, something fundamental shifts. You start to recognize how much energy you've been wasting on this, how many hours you spent explaining things that didn't need explaining, how much mental space you've given to people's potential reactions instead of just living according to your own clarity. There's a concept that captures this perfectly, and it goes something like this. When you know what you meant, when you're clear on your own intentions, when you're grounded in your own reasoning, the need to explain it to others starts to dissolve, not because you don't care what they think, but because you're no longer dependent on their understanding to feel okay about your choices. This is where real clarity comes from, not from external validation, not from getting everyone on the same page, but from internal alignment, from knowing why you're doing what you're doing and being okay with that, regardless of whether anyone else gets it. And here's what's wild. Once you stop over-explaining, once you stop trying to manage everyone's perception of you, your communication actually becomes clearer. Because now you're not speaking from a place of defense. You're not carefully crafting every sentence to avoid misunderstanding. You're just saying what needs to be said, directly and simply, without all the extra layers of justification. People notice this. They might not be able to articulate what's different, but they feel it. There's a confidence that comes through when someone speaks without need to justify themselves. Not arrogance, confidence. The kind that comes from being aligned with yourself, not from proving something to others. But let's be clear about what this doesn't mean. It doesn't mean you never explain anything. It doesn't mean you become this closed-off person who refuses to communicate. There are absolutely times when explanation is valuable, when it serves a purpose, when the other person genuinely needs clarity, and you're in a position to provide it. The difference is intention. You're explaining because it adds value, because it genuinely helps the situation, because the other person is actually open to understanding. You're not explaining as a reflex. You're not doing it because you feel uncomfortable with the possibility of being misunderstood. You're not doing it to chase validation, and that distinction changes everything. Because now your communication is intentional. You're choosing when to engage, when to clarify, when to invest the energy in making sure someone understands. And you're also choosing when it's not worth it, when the person isn't actually interested in understanding, when the explanation would just be you talking into a void. This selectiveness, this intentional approach to when and how you explain yourself, it creates boundaries without you having to announce them. It sets a standard for how you engage with people. And that standard, maintained consistently over time, changes how people interact with you. Some people won't like it. They're used to getting full access to your reasoning, your thought process, your justifications. And when that access suddenly isn't automatic anymore, when you're not explaining yourself at every turn, they'll push back. They'll ask more questions. They'll seem confused. They'll maybe even suggest you're being secretive or distant. But here's what's actually happening. They're adjusting to a new dynamic, a dynamic where your choices don't require their approval, where your decisions stand on their own, where you're not constantly seeking their validation. And for people who are used to having that influence over you, even if they weren't consciously aware they had it, that adjustment feels uncomfortable. But that discomfort isn't your problem to fix. You're not responsible for making everyone comfortable with your boundaries. You're not obligated to over-explain just because someone expects it. And the moment you truly internalize that, the moment you stop taking on the responsibility of managing everyone's comfort level with how you live your life, you free up an enormous amount of energy. Energy that was previously scattered across a dozen different explanations, spread thin, trying to get everyone to understand, exhausted from constantly justifying yourself. That energy comes back to you, and you can use it for something that actually matters. At the same time, something else starts to happen. You begin to see patterns in who actually deserves your explanation and who doesn't. You start to recognize the difference between someone who's genuinely trying to understand and someone who just wants to challenge you. Between someone who's asking from a place of curiosity and someone who's asking from a place of judgment. And once you can see that distinction, your interactions become so much simpler. Because now you're not treating every question the same way. You're not giving everyone the same level of access. You're being selective, intentional, strategic about where you invest your communication. This doesn't make you manipulative or calculating. It makes you discerning. It means you value your own time and energy enough to be thoughtful about how you spend it. And that thoughtfulness, that selectiveness, it creates a different quality of interaction. When you do choose to explain something, when you do decide someone deserves that level of clarity, it means something. It's not just automatic. It's not just you going through the motions of justifying yourself. It's a genuine exchange, a real communication, where both sides are actually engaged. And those interactions, the intentional ones, the ones you choose rather than the ones you fall into, those are the ones that actually matter. Those are the ones that build real understanding, real connection. Not the endless explanations that go nowhere, not the defensive justifications that leave everyone exhausted. The clear, direct, intentional communication that happens when both people are actually present. So here's the shift. Stop explaining yourself to people who are never going to understand anyway. Stop wasting your breath on justifications that don't need to exist. Stop making your peace conditional on whether everyone gets it, and start trusting that you can live according to your own clarity, make decisions based on your own understanding, and move forward without needing everyone's approval. Because at the end of the day, the people who matter, the ones who actually care about you, who actually want to understand, they'll ask genuine questions. They'll seek real clarity. And for those people, you'll have the energy to explain, because you're not depleted from explaining yourself to everyone else. Toplam kelime sayısı 2350 kelime. Bu bölüm 5750 kelime toplam. Dikkat! Bölüm 2'yi 3400 kelimeye tamamlamam gerekiyor. Devam ediyorum. And this brings us to something most people never consider: the relationship between explanation and control. Every time you feel compelled to explain yourself, especially when nobody asked, you're giving away a piece of your autonomy. You're making someone else's understanding a requirement for your own comfort. And that's a subtle but significant shift in where your power lives. Think about the last time you made a decision that felt right to you, but you knew others might not get it. Maybe it was choosing to spend your Friday night alone instead of going out. Maybe it was turning down an opportunity that looked good on paper but didn't align with what you actually wanted. Maybe it was setting a boundary that felt necessary, but might seem harsh to someone looking from the outside. Now think about what happened next. Did you just make the decision and live with it peacefully? Or did you immediately start constructing the narrative you'd tell people when they inevitably asked about it? Did you rehearse the explanation? Did you anticipate their questions and prepare your answers? Did you build a case in your mind for why this was the right call? If you're like most people, you did all of that, and you probably didn't even notice you were doing it, because that's how automatic this pattern has become. The moment you make a choice that might not be immediately understood by others, your brain kicks into explanation mode. Not because anyone asked, not because anyone's confused, but because you've trained yourself to believe that your choices need to make sense to other people, not just to you. But here's what that training does over time. It makes you second-guess yourself. Because when you're constantly building cases for your decisions, when you're always preparing to justify them, You start to question whether they're actually valid. You start looking for external confirmation instead of trusting your internal clarity. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, your decision-making process becomes less about what feels right to you and more about what you can defend to others. That's a dangerous shift because now you're not really making your own choices anymore. You're making the choices you can explain, choices you can justify, choices that will make sense to the people around you. And in doing that, you've let other people's potential reactions shape your decisions before you even make them. This is where a lot of people get stuck. They're living their lives at a distance from themselves, constantly filtering their choices through this imagined audience of people they might have to explain things to. And the tragedy is, most of those people don't actually care that much. They're not sitting around analyzing your decisions. They're not losing sleep over whether you made the right call. They're living their own lives, dealing with their own stuff, barely thinking about you at all. But you're thinking about them. You're anticipating their reactions. You're preparing your explanations. You're building arguments for choices that don't need defending. And in all of that mental activity, you're missing something crucial. You don't actually owe anyone this level of access to your reasoning. Now, I know what you might be thinking, but I'm just being considerate. I'm making sure people understand where I'm coming from. I'm being clear. And sure, sometimes that's true. Sometimes explanation is an act of care, of wanting to be understood, of valuing the relationship enough to provide context. But be honest with yourself. How often is that actually what's happening? How often are you explaining because you genuinely want to share your perspective versus explaining because you're uncomfortable with the possibility that someone might not agree with you? How often is it about clarity versus about seeking approval? Because there's a massive difference between those two things. One comes from strength, from a grounded sense of self that wants to share but doesn't need validation. The other comes from insecurity, from a place that needs external confirmation to feel okay about internal choices. And most of the time, if you're really honest, it's the second one. And that's okay. That's not something to beat yourself up about. It's just something to notice. Because once you see it, once you recognize this pattern for what it is, you can start to make different choices. You can start asking yourself, before you launch into an explanation, who is this for? Is this for them because they need clarity? Or is this for me because I need them to validate my choice? And if it's the second one, if you're explaining to manage your own discomfort, you can catch yourself. You can pause. You can choose differently. You can choose to sit with that discomfort instead of immediately trying to fix it through explanation. You can let someone not understand without making that your emergency. You can make your decision, live with it, and trust that you don't need everyone's agreement to know it was the right call for you. This is harder than it sounds. I'm not going to pretend it's easy, because we're wired for social connection, for belonging, for being understood by the people around us. And there's nothing wrong with wanting that. But when that want becomes a need, when you can't make a choice without external validation, when you can't sit with being misunderstood, when you can't let go of the urge to explain yourself into everyone's approval, that's when it becomes a problem. That's when it starts costing you more than it gives you. That's when your energy gets drained by endless justifications that don't actually change anything. That's when your peace becomes conditional on whether people get it. And that's a recipe for exhaustion. So what's the alternative? How do you break this pattern? It starts small. It starts with noticing the urge to explain when nobody asked. It starts with catching yourself mid-justification and asking whether this is actually necessary. It starts with tolerating the mild discomfort of someone potentially not understanding without immediately rushing to fix it. And over time, as you practice this, something shifts. The urge to explain becomes less automatic. The discomfort of being misunderstood becomes more tolerable. And you start to realize that most of the explanations you thought were necessary weren't actually serving anyone, least of all you. You start to experience what it feels like to make a choice and just live with it. No justification, no defense, no building a case, just clarity within yourself and the quiet confidence that comes from trusting your own judgment more than you need others' approval. And that confidence, that's what people actually respect. Not the perfectly crafted explanations, not the thorough justifications, but the person who knows what they're about and doesn't need to convince everyone else of it. The person who can say, "This is what I'm doing," and let that be enough. The person who values their own clarity more than external validation. That person isn't cold, isn't distant, isn't closed off. They're just grounded. And that groundedness creates a different kind of presence, one that doesn't need to fill every silence with justification, one that can let people be confused without making that confusion their problem to solve, one that knows the difference between communication that serves a purpose and explanation that's just seeking approval in disguise. Chapter 3. The Weight of Silence. There's a moment that happens in certain conversations. You've probably experienced it dozens of times without fully recognizing what was actually going on. Someone says something designed to get a reaction out of you. Maybe it's a subtle dig wrapped in humor. Maybe it's a challenge disguised as a question. Maybe it's just something said with a particular tone that's meant to pull you in, to get you to respond, to prove something, to defend yourself. And in that moment, you have a choice. Most people don't realize it's a choice because the urge to respond feels so automatic, so necessary. But it is a choice. You can engage. You can take the bait. You can give them the reaction they're fishing for. Or you can do something that feels almost unnatural at first. You can simply let it pass. No response, no acknowledgement, no visible reaction whatsoever, just silence. And here's what most people don't understand about that silence. It's not passive. It's not avoidance. It's not weakness pretending to be strength. That silence is one of the most active, powerful choices you can make. Because in that moment of restraint, you're doing something that completely changes the dynamic of the interaction. You're refusing to play a game you never agreed to play. Think about what happens when someone throws something at you, verbally, emotionally, whatever, and you don't react. They're expecting feedback. They're expecting some kind of emotional signal that tells them they've landed, that they've affected you, that they've successfully pulled you into their frame. And when that feedback doesn't come, when there's just this absence where they expected engagement, something interesting happens. They're left with uncertainty. They don't know if it landed. They don't know if you caught it and chose to ignore it, or if you genuinely didn't even register it as worth your attention. They don't know if you're unbothered or if you're just controlling your reaction. And that uncertainty, that lack of clear feedback, it creates a kind of psychological tension that has nowhere to go except back to them. Suddenly, instead of you sitting there thinking about what they said, analyzing it, crafting the perfect response, they're the ones thinking. They're the ones questioning. Did it work? Did they notice? Should I push harder? Should I back off? And while they're doing all of that mental gymnastics, where are you? Exactly where you were before they tried to pull you in. Unaffected, unmoved, still in control of your own state. This is the part most people miss when they think about silence. They think it's about not saying anything, but it's not about the absence of words. It's about the presence of control. It's about maintaining your center when someone's trying to pull you out of it. It's about refusing to hand over your emotional state to whoever happens to say something triggering that day. And the beautiful thing about this approach is that it requires almost no effort. You're not trying to outsmart anyone. You're not crafting some clever response. You're not playing mental chess trying to anticipate their next move. You're simply choosing not to participate. You're simply deciding that this particular moment, this particular comment, this particular attempt to engage you doesn't deserve your energy. But let's be real about what this actually feels like when you're in it. Because the first few times you try this, it's uncomfortable, really uncomfortable. Every instinct you have is screaming at you to say something, to respond, to defend yourself, to prove a point, to show them they didn't get to you. The urge is physical. You can feel it in your chest, in your throat, in the way your mind immediately starts formulating responses. And sitting with that urge without acting on it, that's hard. It feels like you're letting them get away with something. It feels like you're being weak, like you're letting them win. But here's what's actually happening in that moment. You're proving to yourself that the urge doesn't control you. You're demonstrating that you can feel the pull to react and still choose not to. And that demonstration, that proof of self-control, it builds something inside you that's way more valuable than any response you could have given. It builds confidence, not the loud kind that needs to be displayed, the quiet kind that doesn't need validation because it knows its own strength. The kind that comes from recognizing you have more control over yourself than you thought, and that confidence changes how you move through the world. Because now you're not at the mercy of every comment, every situation, every person who tries to pull you into reaction. You know you can sit with discomfort. You know you can feel triggered and still choose restraint. You know that your silence is not weakness. It's a deliberate choice. And once you know that, once you've proven it to yourself enough times that it becomes natural, something fundamental shifts in how you experience interactions. Situations that used to feel tense start to feel neutral. Comments that would have lived rent-free in your head for hours just slide off. You begin to see how much of your previous stress wasn't actually coming from what was being said. It was coming from how you were responding to it. And once that becomes clear, the motivation to react starts to dissolve. It just doesn't feel necessary anymore. There's an old saying that captures this perfectly. The lion doesn't turn around when the small dog barks. And while it sounds arrogant on the surface, there's something deeper there. It's not about thinking you're better than anyone. It's about recognizing that not everything deserves your attention. Not every challenge needs to be met. Not every bark needs to be acknowledged. And when you start operating from that place, people notice. They might not be able to articulate what's different, but they feel it. There's a shift in how they approach you. Some people will test it, pushing harder to see if they can still get a reaction. They'll escalate, trying different angles, different tactics, waiting for you to snap back into the old pattern. But when you don't, when you remain steady, when you continue choosing silence where they expect engagement, they eventually stop. Not always immediately, but over time. Because they're not getting what they're looking for. They're not getting the feedback that makes the game worth playing. And without that feedback, their attempts just feel empty, pointless, like throwing punches at air. Others will respond differently. They'll become more measured in how they interact with you, more respectful, not because you demanded it, but because they sense you're not someone who's easily pulled into unnecessary exchanges. They recognize, on some level, that your attention isn't automatic, that your engagement isn't guaranteed, and that recognition creates a different dynamic, one where you're not constantly defending, constantly reacting, constantly managing everyone else's provocations. Now, here's where people usually get this wrong. They hear about the power of silence, and they think it means becoming this stoic, emotionless robot who never engages with anything. They think it means withdrawing from life, avoiding conflict, being distant and cold. But that's not what this is about at all. You're still present. You're still aware. You're still fully engaged with life. The difference is you're selective. You're intentional. You're not giving your attention to everything that asks for it. You're choosing what deserves your response and what doesn't. And that selectiveness, that's where the power lives. Because when you're always available, when you always respond, when you always engage, your presence becomes expected. It becomes taken for granted. There's no weight to it because it's always there, predictable, automatic. But when you're selective, when people know that your attention, your response, your engagement is actually a choice you make rather than a default you operate from, suddenly that presence carries value. It's the difference between someone who's always talking and someone who speaks when it matters. You notice when the second person talks because it's not constant background noise. It means something. It has weight. And that weight comes from restraint, from the fact that they're not saying everything that crosses their mind, not responding to every little thing, not filling every silence with words. This principle applies to more than just conversations. It shapes how you move through your entire life. Think about your energy, your attention, your emotional investment. When you give these freely to everything and everyone, when you're constantly available, constantly responsive, constantly engaged with every situation that presents itself, what happens? You get scattered. Your focus gets divided across 100 different things. Your energy gets depleted by constant engagement. Your presence becomes diluted because you're everywhere, responding to everything, but never fully anchored anywhere. You end up feeling exhausted without even doing anything particularly demanding, because the demand isn't in any single interaction. It's in the cumulative effect of never saying no, never stepping back, never choosing to conserve your resources. But when you become selective, when you start filtering what deserves your energy and what doesn't, everything changes. Your attention becomes more focused. Your actions become more deliberate. You're not scattered across every possible interaction. You're investing fully in the ones that actually matter. And because of that, those interactions have more depth, more quality, more genuine presence. There's also something that happens internally when you practice this kind of selectiveness. You become more stable. You're not constantly adjusting your emotional state based on what's happening around you. You're not shifting based on every comment, every situation, every minor change in your environment. You have this core, this center, that remains consistent regardless of external noise. And that consistency, that's what people actually respect. Not because you're trying to project an image or play some social game, but because there's something real there, something grounded, something that doesn't need to prove itself through constant reaction and engagement. Think about the people in your life who have this quality, the ones who seem unshakable, the ones who don't get pulled into drama, don't get sucked into petty conflicts, don't feel the need to respond to every little thing. What is it about them that creates that impression? It's not that they never engage. It's not that they don't care. It's that they're selective about what they engage with. They have standards for what deserves their attention. And those standards, that's what you're building when you practice restraint. Every time you feel the urge to react and you choose not to, you're reinforcing a boundary. You're establishing a standard. You're communicating to yourself and to the world that not everything gets access to you. Not everything gets your energy. Not everything deserves your response. This doesn't happen overnight. It's not like you decide one day to be more selective and suddenly everything changes. It's a practice. It's something you have to choose repeatedly, in small moments, again and again, until it becomes natural, until restraint stops feeling like you're holding something back and starts feeling like you're simply choosing where to invest. And as you practice this, you start to notice patterns. You begin to see which situations tend to pull you in unnecessarily, which types of comments trigger you more than others, which environments make you more reactive. And with that awareness, you can make better choices. You can anticipate the pull before it happens. You can recognize the moment when someone's trying to engage you in something that doesn't serve you. And in that recognition, you have power. Because now, you're not being pulled unconsciously. You see what's happening. You understand the dynamic, and you can choose whether to participate or simply let it pass. That choice, repeated over time, builds something that most people search for their entire lives without finding it. Genuine control. Not control over others, not control over every situation, but control over yourself, over your responses, over where your energy goes and what gets to affect you. There's a level of freedom in that that's hard to describe until you've experienced it. The freedom of knowing that someone can say something designed to trigger you and you can just not be triggered. The freedom of sitting in a tense moment without feeling compelled to fix it, resolve it, or explain yourself out of it. The freedom of letting someone be wrong about you without needing to correct them. That freedom doesn't come from not caring. It comes from knowing what's worth caring about and what isn't. It comes from trusting your own judgment enough that you don't need external validation. It comes from being so clear about who you are and what you're about that you don't need to prove it to anyone. And once you have that, once you've built that foundation of self-trust and selective engagement, your entire experience of life shifts. You're not constantly on defense. You're not always in reaction mode. You're not spending your mental energy on things that don't deserve it. You're just present, grounded, moving through situations with a kind of ease that comes from knowing you don't have to participate in every game you're invited to play. This is what selective silence creates. Not emptiness, not distance, not disengagement from life, but a more intentional, more powerful, more peaceful way of existing in the world, where your presence isn't diluted by constant reaction, where your energy isn't scattered across unnecessary engagements, where your peace isn't conditional on everyone understanding you or agreeing with you. And the best part? You don't have to announce this change. You don't have to explain your new approach. You just live it. You practice it. You choose it again and again until it becomes who you are. And people adjust. The dynamic shifts. Your life becomes quieter in the best possible way. Not because there's less happening, but because you're no longer carrying the weight of every unnecessary reaction, every pointless engagement, every situation that was never yours to fix. Chapter 4. The Filter. Let's talk about something that seems simple on the surface, but changes everything once you actually implement it. The idea that you get to decide what deserves your energy. Not what society says should matter, not what your family thinks you should care about, not what your friends expect you to react to. You, your decision, your standards. Most people never actually claim this power. They move through life with their doors wide open, accepting every invitation to react, to engage, to invest their attention in whatever happens to show up. Someone sends a passive-aggressive text. They spend an hour analyzing it. A coworker makes a snide comment. They replay it all afternoon. They see something on social media that irritates them. There goes another 20 minutes of mental energy they'll never get back. And the crazy part is, they don't even realize this is a choice. They think this is just how life works. Things happen, you respond. People say things, you engage. Situations arise, you deal with them. The idea that you could simply choose not to, that you could look at something and consciously decide, this doesn't get my energy, never even crosses their mind. But that decision, that filtering process, is where everything changes. Because your energy isn't unlimited. Your attention isn't infinite. Your mental and emotional resources are finite. And every moment you spend on something that doesn't actually matter is a moment you can't spend on something that does. It's a zero-sum game, whether you acknowledge it or not. So here's the question. What's currently getting your energy? Not what you think should be getting it, or what you'd like to be spending it on, but what's actually consuming it day to day. Because if you're honest about this, if you actually track where your mental and emotional energy goes over the course of a week, you might be shocked at how much of it is being absorbed by things that add absolutely nothing to your life. Arguments you'll never win. misunderstandings you can't fix, other people's opinions about choices that aren't theirs to make, situations you can't control trying to control them anyway, people who will never understand you trying to make them understand. All of this consumes energy. All of it takes from you, and none of it gives anything back. And the thing is, you already know this. On some level, you're aware that you're wasting energy on things that don't matter, but awareness alone doesn't change the pattern. Because the pattern is deep, it's automatic. It's been running for so long that it feels like just part of who you are. But it's not. It's just a habit. And like any habit, it can be changed. The first step is recognition, not judgment, not beating yourself up about it, just recognition. Start noticing when you're about to invest energy in something. Catch that moment before you dive in, before you engage, before you commit your attention to it. And in that moment, ask yourself one simple question. Does this actually deserve my energy? Not, is this important? Not, should I care about this? Just, does this deserve my energy specifically? Because something can be important in the abstract without being worth your personal investment. Something can matter in general without needing to matter to you. And until you make that distinction, you'll keep giving yourself away to things that were never yours to carry. Let me give you an example. Someone at work makes a decision you disagree with. It's not your project, not your department, not your responsibility, but it bothers you. It seems wrong, inefficient, short-sighted. And now you're thinking about it. You're discussing it with coworkers. You're maybe even considering saying something to the person who made the decision, even though it's not really your place. Now ask yourself, does this deserve your energy? Yes, the decision might be flawed. Yes, it might create problems down the line. Yes, if you were in charge, you'd do it differently. But none of that answers the actual question. Does this specific situation which you can't control and aren't responsible for deserve your mental and emotional investment? Most of the time, the honest answer is no, it doesn't. And once you acknowledge that, once you really see it clearly, you can let it go. Not because you don't care, but because caring about it doesn't serve you. Because your energy is better spent elsewhere. Because you have a limited amount of it, and this isn't how you want to use it. This process, this active filtering, it's not something you do once and you're done. It's something you have to practice constantly. Because life is constantly throwing things at you, constantly inviting you to react, to engage, to invest. And if you don't have a filter, if you don't have some way of deciding what gets through and what doesn't, you'll end up scattered. Your energy will be divided across 100 different things, none of which you chose intentionally. But when you do have a filter, when you actively decide what deserves you and what doesn't, everything becomes clearer. Your focus sharpens. Your actions become more deliberate. You're not being pulled in every direction. You're choosing a direction and moving in it, without constantly being interrupted by things that don't actually align with where you're trying to go. And here's what's interesting. As you practice this, your standards naturally rise. You start to recognize that a lot of what you used to invest in wasn't actually worth it. You begin to see that you were giving your energy to things not because they deserved it, but because you didn't know you could choose not to. And once you realize you have that choice, once you experience what it feels like to conserve your energy for what actually matters, you become more protective of it. You develop what you might call an internal standard, a baseline for what you'll engage with and what you won't. And that standard acts as a filter that runs automatically. You don't have to consciously decide every single time whether something deserves your energy. You just feel it. You recognize what aligns with your standard and what doesn't, and you act accordingly without hesitation, without second guessing. This is where discipline comes in, because your mind will fight this. Your old patterns will try to reassert themselves. You'll feel that familiar pull to react, to engage, to invest in things that don't deserve you. And in those moments, you have to hold the line. You have to remind yourself what you're protecting and why it matters. Because what you're protecting isn't just your energy in the abstract. It's your capacity to build something, your ability to focus on what actually moves your life forward, your mental space to think clearly, to make good decisions, to be present for the people and projects that genuinely matter. And every time you give that away to something that doesn't deserve it, you're undermining your own foundation. Think about the last week. How much mental energy did you spend on things that, looking back now, were completely pointless? How many hours did you lose to replaying conversations, analyzing situations, thinking about what you should have said or done differently? And what did that get you? Did it change anything? Did it make you feel better? Did it move you forward in any meaningful way? Probably not. And that's the cost most people never calculate. They think about time in terms of hours and minutes, but they don't think about energy the same way. They don't see how spending mental energy on something draining affects their capacity for everything else. They don't recognize that coming home mentally exhausted from a day of unnecessary reactions leaves them with nothing left for the things they actually care about. But once you start seeing this clearly, once you understand the real cost of giving your energy to things that don't deserve it, you become much more selective. You start treating your energy like the valuable resource it is. And that shift changes how you move through the world. You're no longer reacting to everything that comes your way. You're filtering. You're deciding. You're choosing which situations get your attention and which ones don't. And that choice creates a kind of efficiency that most people never experience. Because you're not wasting energy on things that don't matter. You're not carrying around mental weight that isn't yours. You're moving through life lighter, clearer, more focused. At the same time, your relationships change. Because when you raise your internal standard, when you stop engaging with everything and everyone by default, people notice. Some of them won't like it. They'll feel the shift. They'll realize that they can't pull you into things as easily as they used to, that their comments don't get the same reaction, that their drama doesn't capture your attention the way it once did. And for some people, that's uncomfortable. They were used to a version of you that was more available, more reactive, more engaged with their stuff. And this new version, the one with boundaries, the one with standards, the one who doesn't automatically give energy to everything, feels different. Maybe even threatening to the dynamic they were comfortable with. But here's the thing. That discomfort isn't your problem to fix. You're not responsible for making everyone comfortable with your growth. You're not obligated to keep lowering your standards just because someone else hasn't raised theirs. And the moment you truly internalize that, the moment you stop trying to manage everyone's reaction to your boundaries, something powerful happens. The people who don't align with your standards start to fade out. Not always dramatically, not always with conflict, but they just drift. Because without the constant engagement they were getting before, without you feeding energy into dynamics that were draining you, there's nothing holding the connection together, and that's okay. That's actually exactly what should happen. At the same time, the people who do align with your standards become more prominent. Your interactions with them deepen. You have more to give because you're not depleted from giving to everyone else. Your connections become more meaningful because they're based on genuine alignment, not just proximity or habit or obligation. This sorting process happens naturally once you establish a clear standard. You don't have to force it. You don't have to announce it. You just live it. You maintain your filter. You protect your energy. You engage intentionally instead of automatically. And your life reorganizes itself around that new way of operating. There's also an internal shift that happens alongside all of this. As you become more selective externally, you become more stable internally. You're not being pulled into every situation. You're not adjusting your state based on every comment or circumstance. You have this core, this center, that remains consistent regardless of what's happening around you. And that consistency creates a kind of peace that most people only glimpse occasionally. It's not the absence of problems or challenges. It's not some blissed out state where nothing bothers you. It's something different. It's the knowledge that even when things do bother you, even when situations arise that are genuinely difficult, you have the capacity to choose how much energy you give them. You're not at their mercy. You're not being controlled by external circumstances. You have agency over your own state. And that agency, that power to decide what affects you and to what degree, it creates a foundation of stability that nothing outside you can shake. This is what most people are actually searching for when they talk about wanting peace. They're not looking for a life without problems. They're looking for the internal stability to handle whatever comes without being destabilized by it. They're looking for the strength to engage with difficulty without being consumed by it. They're looking for the wisdom to know what deserves their energy and what doesn't. And that's exactly what this filter provides. It's not about avoiding life or hiding from challenges. It's about being selective. It's about recognizing that you have limited resources and unlimited opportunities to waste them. It's about choosing to invest where it matters and conserve where it doesn't. Over time, this becomes second nature. You don't have to think about it consciously. You just operate from this place of selectiveness. You feel when something aligns with your standard and when it doesn't. And you act accordingly without drama, without explanation, without needing to justify your choices to anyone. Because at this point, you're not making choices based on what others think you should do. You're making them based on your own clarity about what matters. And that clarity comes from having filtered through enough situations to know what serves you and what doesn't. From having protected your energy enough times to feel the difference it makes. From having raised your standards and experience the quality of life that comes from maintaining them. And here's what's beautiful about reaching this point. It's self-reinforcing. Every time you choose to filter something out, every time you decide something doesn't deserve your energy, you strengthen that muscle. You make it easier to make that same choice next time. You build momentum in the direction of selectiveness, of intentionality, of protecting what matters. At the same time, you become less tolerant of anything that violates your standard. Not in an aggressive way, not in a way where you're constantly calling people out or creating conflict. Just in a quiet way where you simply don't engage with it. You don't give it energy. You don't let it in. And because you've experienced what life feels like when you maintain your standards, going back to the old way of operating, where you gave your energy to everything, becomes unthinkable. This is where the real transformation happens. Not in some dramatic moment of change, but in this gradual shift where maintaining your standards becomes who you are, not something you have to remember to do. Where filtering what deserves your energy becomes automatic. Where protecting your peace isn't a practice you engage in. It's just how you move through the world. And once you're operating from this place, once this has become natural, you begin to see how much of your previous struggle was self-created, how much of the exhaustion, the stress, the feeling of being overwhelmed was coming from giving your energy to things that were never worth it in the first place. You begin to recognize that the problem was never the amount of challenges you faced or the difficulty of your circumstances. The problem was that you were facing them all. You were engaging with everything. You hadn't learned to filter. You hadn't developed the wisdom to know what deserves you and what doesn't. And now that you have that wisdom, now that you've built that filter, life doesn't necessarily get easier. The same situations still arise. People still say things. Conflicts still emerge. But your experience of all of it is fundamentally different because you're not being pulled into everything anymore. You're choosing what you engage with, and that choice makes all the difference. Chapter 5. The Final Integration. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about reaction, about explanation, about silence, about filtering what deserves your energy. But now we need to talk about something that ties all of this together. Something that determines whether these ideas stay theoretical or actually become how you live. And that something is this: understanding your triggers at a level most people never reach. Not just knowing what sets you off, but understanding why. Not just recognizing when you're being pulled into reaction, but seeing the underlying pattern that makes you vulnerable to being pulled in the first place. Because here's the truth. None of what we've discussed works if you don't understand yourself. You can know intellectually that you shouldn't react to everything. You can understand logically that not every situation deserves your energy. You can even practice restraint occasionally when you remember to. But if you don't understand what's happening beneath the surface, if you don't see the deeper mechanisms that drive your reactions, you'll keep falling into the same patterns. Let me explain what I mean. When something triggers you, when you feel that immediate urge to react, to defend, to explain, to engage, that's not random. It's not just happening because someone said something or did something. It's happening because that specific thing is touching something deeper in you. Some belief, some expectation, some need that isn't being met. Maybe it's the need to be respected. Maybe it's the desire to be understood. Maybe it's the expectation that people should see you a certain way. Maybe it's the belief that your choices need to be validated by others. Whatever it is, that's what's actually driving the reaction. The external situation is just the trigger. The real source is internal, and until you identify that source, until you understand what's actually being activated when you get triggered, you're going to keep reacting. You can try to control it, try to suppress it, try to talk yourself out of it in the moment, but it'll keep coming up because you're treating the symptom without addressing the cause. So let's get practical about this. Think about the last time you had a strong reaction to something, not just a mild irritation, but something that really got under your skin, something that stuck with you that you thought about for hours afterward. Got it? Okay, now ask yourself, what was that really about? Was it actually about what the person said? Or was it about what they're saying it meant to you? Was it about the situation itself? Or was it about what the situation seemed to say about you, your choices, your worth, your judgment? Because 9 times out of 10, it's the second one. The trigger isn't the external event. It's what that event seems to imply about something you care about. And here's where it gets interesting. Once you understand that, once you see the real source of your reaction, it starts to lose some of its power over you. Not because the trigger goes away, but because you understand it. You see it for what it is. And understanding changes everything. Because now, when someone says something that would normally trigger you, you can catch yourself. You can feel that familiar reaction starting to build, but instead of being swept up in it, you can step back slightly. You can observe it. You can ask yourself, what's this actually touching? What belief or expectation is being challenged right now? And in that moment of reflection, something shifts. The reaction doesn't have the same grip on you. It's still there. You still feel it. But you're not controlled by it. You have space between the feeling and the action. And in that space, you have a choice. This is what real discipline looks like. Not forcing yourself to suppress emotion, not pretending you don't feel things, but understanding yourself well enough that your feelings don't dictate your behavior. Understanding the mechanism well enough that you can see it operating in real time and choose whether to follow it or not. And the more you practice this, the more you catch yourself, examine the trigger, understand what's really happening, the more that space grows. The reaction becomes less automatic. The triggers become less powerful. Not because you're becoming numb or detached, but because you're becoming more aware, more conscious, more in control of yourself. Now, let's be clear about something. This process isn't comfortable. Examining your triggers, looking at what's really driving your reactions, confronting the beliefs and expectations you've been operating from, it's not easy work. It's much easier to just blame the external situation, to say, they made me react, or that situation was stressful, or anyone would be upset in that circumstance. But that kind of externalization keeps you powerless. It keeps you at the mercy of whatever happens around you. It maintains the pattern where your state is determined by external factors. And as long as you're operating from that place, you'll never have the kind of control we've been talking about. The shift happens when you take responsibility, not in a self-blaming way, not in a way where you beat yourself up for having reactions, just in a straightforward, honest way where you acknowledge, my reaction is mine. It's coming from something in me. And if it's in me, then I can understand it. And if I can understand it, I can change my relationship to it. This is where everything we've discussed starts to integrate. Because when you understand your triggers, you can be more selective about what you engage with. When you recognize the patterns that pull you into unnecessary reaction, you can catch them earlier. When you see clearly what's driving your need to explain or defend or prove, you can choose differently. And over time, with practice, with consistency, with genuine self-examination, something remarkable happens. You develop what you might call internal stability, not the absence of emotion, but the ability to experience emotion without being controlled by it. Not the lack of triggers, but the wisdom to recognize them and choose how much power to give them. This stability changes everything, because now you're not being tossed around by every comment, every situation, every circumstance that comes your way. You have a center, a core that remains steady even when things around you are chaotic. And from that center, you can engage with life more effectively than you ever could from a reactive state. You make better decisions because you're not deciding from a place of emotional reactivity. You communicate more clearly because you're not speaking from a place of defense. You build stronger relationships because you're not constantly being pulled into unnecessary conflict. You accomplish more because you're not wasting energy on things that don't deserve it. And here's the beautiful part. This isn't some destination you reach and then you're done. It's a way of operating that gets stronger the more you practice it. Every time you catch yourself before reacting, you strengthen that muscle. Every time you examine a trigger, instead of just following it, you deepen your understanding. Every time you choose restraint over reaction, you reinforce the pattern. Over time, this becomes natural. It becomes who you are, not something you have to remember to do. And when you reach that point, when operating from this place of awareness and selectiveness and internal stability is just your default mode, you begin to experience life in a fundamentally different way. Things that used to derail you for hours or days barely register. Situations that used to feel overwhelming feel manageable. People who used to be able to push your buttons find they can't anymore, not because you've built walls, but because you've developed understanding. And in that shift, you reclaim something most people give away without even realizing it: your peace. Not peace as the absence of difficulty, not peace as some Zen-like state where nothing bothers you, but peace as a foundation that remains intact regardless of what's happening on the surface. Peace as the knowledge that you have agency over your own state. Peace as the confidence that comes from truly understanding yourself. And once you have that peace, once you've built that foundation, you protect it. Not aggressively, not by shutting people out or avoiding life, but by being selective, by knowing what deserves your energy and what doesn't, by recognizing what aligns with your standards and what violates them, by understanding what serves you and what drains you. This selectiveness isn't about being rigid or closed off. It's about being intentional. It's about treating your peace as something valuable, something worth protecting, rather than something you give away freely to anyone who happens to ask for it. And the thing is, most people will never understand this. They'll keep giving their peace away. They'll keep reacting to everything. They'll keep letting their state be determined by external circumstances. They'll keep exhausting themselves with unnecessary engagement, unnecessary explanation, unnecessary investment in things that don't matter. But you don't have to be most people. You can choose differently. You can decide right now that your peace matters more than proving a point, that your energy is too valuable to waste on situations that don't deserve it, that your attention is too important to give freely to everything that asks for it. You can decide that from this moment forward, you're going to operate from a place of selectiveness, that you're going to filter what comes your way, that you're going to examine your triggers instead of being controlled by them, that you're going to build and maintain standards for what you engage with. And when you make that decision, really make it, not just think about it, but actually commit to living it, everything starts to change, not overnight, not all at once, but gradually, consistently, in ways that compound over time. You'll notice it first in small things. A comment that would have bothered you for hours slides off. A situation that would have pulled you into reaction doesn't. An impulse to explain yourself unnecessarily gets recognized and released before you act on it. These small moments, repeated consistently, build momentum, and that momentum carries you forward. It makes the next choice easier. It reinforces the pattern. It strengthens your ability to operate from this place of awareness and selectiveness. And over weeks, months, years, it completely transforms how you experience life. You're not being pulled into drama. You're not wasting energy on things that don't matter. You're not constantly adjusting your state based on external input. You're stable. You're focused. You're moving in a direction you've chosen without constant interruption from things that were never yours to carry. And the people around you notice. They feel the difference. They see that you're not easily pulled in. They recognize that your attention isn't automatic, that your engagement is a choice. And for the people who matter, for the people who align with who you're becoming, that creates respect, real respect, not the kind you have to demand, but the kind that emerges naturally when someone recognizes your strength. At the same time, your own life expands. You have more mental space because you're not carrying around unnecessary reactions. You have more energy because you're not depleting yourself with pointless engagement. You have more clarity because you're not constantly scattered across 100 different concerns that aren't actually yours. And in that expansion, in that space and energy and clarity, you can build. You can focus on what actually matters. You can invest in relationships that add value. You can pursue goals that align with who you're becoming. You can create a life that reflects your choices rather than just your reactions. This is what's possible when you truly integrate everything we've talked about. When you stop giving away your power through unnecessary reaction. When you stop explaining yourself to people who will never understand. When you choose silence over engagement in situations that don't deserve you. When you filter what gets your energy based on clear standards. When you understand your triggers well enough to not be controlled by them. All of this comes together into a way of living that most people never experience. A way that's grounded, intentional, selective, stable. A way that protects your peace while still engaging fully with life, a way that maintains your power while building genuine connections, a way that honors both your strength and your humanity. And the beautiful thing is, you don't need anyone's permission to start living this way. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to explain it. You just start making different choices. You start catching yourself before the reaction. You start filtering before engaging. You start examining before judging. You start choosing before acting. And those choices, repeated consistently over time, become who you are. They stop being things you do and become the foundation of how you operate. And from that foundation, everything else becomes easier, not because life gets easier, but because you've developed the internal capacity to handle whatever comes without being destabilized by it. So here's where we are. You now understand something most people will never grasp. You see the pattern. You recognize how much power you've been given away. You understand the cost of reaction, of over-explanation, of constantly giving your energy to things that don't deserve it. And more importantly, you know there's another way, a way that starts with understanding yourself, with examining your triggers, with being honest about what's driving your reactions, a way that continues with building standards for what you engage with filtering what deserves your energy, with choosing selectiveness over constant availability, a way that results in genuine peace, not the temporary kind that depends on circumstances, but the foundational kind that remains steady, regardless of what's happening around you. The kind that comes from truly understanding yourself and operating from that understanding consistently. This is what ignoring actually means. Not avoidance, not suppression, not pretending things don't exist, but choosing consciously and deliberately what gets your attention, your energy, your engagement. Understanding that you don't have to participate in everything, that not every situation needs your response, that not every trigger needs to be followed, that not every game needs to be played. And when you live from this place, when you operate from this understanding, you discover something profound. Real power was never about controlling others or winning arguments or always having the last word. Real power is about mastering yourself, about maintaining your center when everything around you is trying to pull you away from it, about protecting your peace like it's the most valuable thing you own, because it is. Your peace, your energy, your attention, these are your most valuable resources. And once you truly understand that, once you start treating them with the care they deserve, your entire life transforms, not dramatically, not all at once, but deeply, permanently, in ways that change everything about how you experience being alive. And that transformation, that's what's waiting for you on the other side of this decision. The decision to stop giving your power away. The decision to start living with intention. The decision to protect your peace like your life depends on it. Because in a very real way, it does. So here we are. After everything we've covered, after understanding how you've been giving your power away, after recognizing the trap of over-explanation, after learning the weight of silence, after building your filter, after examining your triggers at their deepest level, here we are at the moment that actually matters. Because everything up until now has been understanding, and understanding is valuable. Don't get me wrong, but understanding without action is just intellectual entertainment. It's just another thing you know that doesn't change how you actually live. It's information that sits in your head, makes you feel informed, maybe even makes you feel enlightened for a moment, but ultimately changes nothing about your day-to-day reality. So let me ask you directly, and I want you to answer this honestly. What are you going to do with everything you now understand? Are you going to close this? Think that was really insightful? Maybe even share it with a friend or save it for later, and then go right back to the same patterns you've been running your whole life? Back to reacting to everything that triggers you? Back to explaining yourself to people who will never understand anyway? Back to giving your energy freely to situations that drain you and give nothing back? Back to letting your peace be determined by whatever random thing happens around you on any given day? Or are you going to actually take what you now understand, really understand, not just intellectually acknowledge, and let it transform how you move through life? Because here's the truth, and there's no way around this. You can't unknow what you know now. You can't pretend you don't see the pattern anymore. The veil has been pulled back. You understand how reaction works and what it costs you. You recognize when you're being pulled into unnecessary engagement. You see clearly what drains your peace and what protects it. That awareness is yours now. It's in you. It's part of how you see the world. The only question that actually matters is what you're going to do with it. And I want to be really clear about something before we go any further. This isn't about perfection. I'm not asking you to become some enlightened being who never reacts, never explains, never gives energy to anything that isn't perfectly aligned with your highest purpose. That's not realistic. That's not even the goal. You're going to slip up. You're going to catch yourself mid-reaction and realize you've already been pulled in. You're going to find yourself 3 sentences into an unnecessary explanation before you remember you didn't need to justify yourself. You're going to give your energy to things that, in retrospect, clearly didn't deserve it. That's going to happen. Probably a lot, especially at first. But that's not failure. That's not evidence that this doesn't work or that you can't do it. That's just being human. That's just what the process actually looks like when you're rewiring patterns that have been running automatically for years, maybe decades. The difference, and this is crucial, is that now you'll notice when you do it. You'll catch yourself. Maybe not before it happens, maybe not even during, but afterward, you'll recognize what just occurred. You'll see the pattern. You'll understand what pulled you in and why. And that recognition, that awareness, that's everything. Because once you see it, once you understand the mechanism, it starts to lose its grip on you. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually, consistently, in ways that compound over time. The pattern that ran completely unconsciously before now has a spotlight on it. And patterns can't survive in the light of awareness the same way they thrive in the darkness of unconsciousness. So you'll notice yourself reacting and you'll pause. Maybe mid-sentence, maybe mid-thought, maybe hours later when you're replaying the interaction. But you'll pause, and in that pause, you'll see what happened. You'll understand the trigger. You'll recognize the automatic response. You'll see clearly that you had a choice, even if you didn't exercise it in that moment. And the next time, maybe not the very next time, but eventually, you'll catch yourself a little earlier. You'll feel the reaction building instead of only noticing it after it's already taken over. You'll sense the urge to explain before the words come out. You'll recognize the pull to engage before you're fully invested in something draining. And in those moments of earlier recognition, you'll have more space, more room to choose differently, more capacity to step back instead of diving in, more power to protect your peace instead of giving it away. That's what this is really about. Not perfect execution from day one, but incremental improvement over time. Not never slipping into old patterns, but catching yourself sooner each time you do. Not eliminating all triggers, but reducing their power over you bit by bit until one day you realize they barely affect you anymore. And here's what makes this possible. Here's what makes this actually achievable, instead of just another nice-sounding theory. You already have everything you need. You don't need to become someone different. You don't need to acquire some special skill or knowledge. You don't need to wait until you're ready or until circumstances are perfect. You just need to start using what you already understand. You need to take the awareness you now have and let it inform your choices. You need to notice when you're about to react and ask yourself if it's worth it. You need to catch the urge to explain and question whether it's necessary. You need to feel the pull to engage with something draining and decide whether it deserves you. One moment at a time, one choice at a time, one decision at a time, to operate differently than you used to. And I know what you might be thinking right now. You might be thinking, but what if I miss opportunities by not engaging? Or what if people think I'm being cold or distant? Or what if holding back makes me less authentic? Let me address those directly because they're important questions and they deserve honest answers. First, you're not going to miss real opportunities by being selective. Real opportunities don't require you to scatter your energy across 100 different things. Real opportunities don't demand that you react to everything. Real opportunities actually become easier to recognize and pursue when you're not constantly distracted by things that don't matter. What you might miss are fake opportunities, situations that look important but are actually just energy drains disguised as obligations. And missing those? That's not a loss. That's protection. Second, yes, some people might perceive you as cold or distant when you stop being constantly available and reactive. Those people are usually the ones who benefited from your old pattern, from you always being accessible, always responding, always giving your energy freely. They're uncomfortable with the change because it means they can't pull you in as easily anymore. But here's what's important to understand. Their discomfort with your boundaries is not your problem to fix. You're not responsible for managing how everyone feels about your growth. You're not obligated to stay small, scattered, and reactive just because some people prefer you that way. The people who actually matter, the people who genuinely care about you, they'll adjust. They'll respect the change. They might not understand it immediately. They might even be confused at first, but they'll recognize that you're operating from a healthier place, and they'll support it. And third, choosing not to react to everything doesn't make you less authentic. If anything, it makes you more authentic. Because now you're responding from genuine choice rather than automatic impulse. Now you're engaging when it actually serves you rather than when you're triggered. Now you're expressing yourself from a grounded place rather than a reactive one. Authenticity isn't about saying everything you think and reacting to everything you feel. Authenticity is about aligning your actions with your actual values instead of just following whatever impulse happens to be loudest in the moment. So let go of those concerns. Let go of the worry that you're somehow doing it wrong by being more selective, more intentional, more protective of your peace. You're not doing it wrong. You're actually doing it right for the first time. And as you continue doing it right, as you continue choosing awareness over reaction, selectiveness over constant availability, protection over depletion, something profound starts to happen. Your entire experience of life begins to shift. Things that used to bother you for days barely register. People who used to trigger you lose their power to pull you off center. Situations that used to feel overwhelming become manageable. The constant mental noise quiets down. Your energy stops leaking out in 1,000 different directions. Your attention becomes more focused. Your peace becomes more stable. Not because your circumstances changed. Not because people around you suddenly started acting differently. Not because life got easier, but because you changed. You changed how you relate to all of it. You stopped giving everything equal access to you. You started filtering what deserves your energy and what doesn't. You began operating from choice instead of reaction. And that internal change, that shift in how you operate, it creates external changes that you couldn't have predicted or forced. Opportunities you weren't looking for start appearing. Relationships that were draining naturally fade out. People who align with who you're becoming gravitate toward you. Your environment reorganizes itself to match your new operating system. This isn't magic. This isn't manifestation or wishful thinking. This is just what happens when you change your fundamental approach to life. When you shift from scattered to focused, from reactive to intentional, from externally controlled to internally stable, everything around you has to adjust to accommodate that new reality. And 6 months from now, hell, even 3 months from now, if you're consistent, you won't recognize your life. Not because every external circumstance will have changed, but because you will have changed so fundamentally that everything looks different through your new lens. The job that felt overwhelming will feel manageable because you're not also carrying the weight of 100 unnecessary reactions. The relationships that felt complicated will feel clearer because you're not trying to manage everyone's perception of you. The goals that felt impossible will feel achievable because you actually have energy to put toward them instead of bleeding it out into situations that don't matter. That's what's possible. That's what's waiting on the other side of this decision, not some fantasy life where everything is perfect and nothing is difficult, but a real life where you have the internal capacity to handle whatever comes without being destabilized by it, where you can face challenges without being consumed by them, where you can engage with difficulty without losing yourself in it, a life where your peace isn't conditional on circumstances, where your stability isn't dependent on other people's behavior, where your power isn't something you give away unconsciously, but something you protect consciously. And all of that, every bit of it, starts with one simple decision: to actually use what you now understand, So this is where we end, but it's also where you begin. Because everything we've talked about, every insight, every understanding, every piece of awareness, all of it is only valuable if you actually apply it, if you take it from theory into practice, if you let it move from something you know into something you live. And you can start right now, today, this exact moment. You don't need to wait. You don't need to prepare. You don't need everything figured out. You just need to make one different choice the next time you're faced with a situation that would normally pull you into old patterns. The next time something triggers you, pause just for a second. Feel that reaction building and ask yourself, does this actually deserve my energy? Is this worth what it's going to cost me to engage with it? Will reacting to this serve me in any meaningful way, or am I just following an old pattern? The next time you feel the urge to explain yourself to someone, stop. Before the words come out, question whether this explanation is actually necessary. Is this person genuinely trying to understand, or are they just challenging you? Is this adding value to the conversation, or am I just seeking validation? Would silence actually be the stronger choice here? The next time a situation tries to pull you in, a drama, a conflict, an opportunity to prove yourself, whatever it is, filter it through the standards you've been building. Ask yourself, does this align with who I'm becoming? Does this serve the life I'm trying to build? Or is this just another distraction disguised as something important? One choice at a time, one moment at a time, one decision at a time to protect your peace instead of giving it away, to maintain your center instead of being pulled off balance, to operate from your standards instead of from automatic reaction. Do that consistently, not perfectly, just consistently, and I promise you, everything changes. Not because I'm making some grand promise I can't keep, but because that's just what happens when you fundamentally shift how you operate. When you move from unconscious reaction to conscious choice, from scattered energy to focused intention, from conditional peace to protected stability, everything has to change to accommodate that shift. The people who don't align with this version of you will naturally fade. The situations that used to drain you will lose their grip. The drama that used to consume your energy will find someone else to feed on because you're no longer available for it. And in all that space, in all that energy you're no longer wasting, you'll build something real, something solid, something sustainable, something that actually reflects who you are when you're not being pulled in every direction by every little thing. That's what's possible. That's what's waiting. That's what you can have if you actually commit to this instead of just understanding it intellectually and moving on. So, what's it going to be? Are you going to protect your peace like it's the most valuable thing you own? Are you going to filter what deserves your energy like you only have so much to give? Are you going to choose your responses instead of just reacting automatically to everything? Or are you going to keep giving it all away to anything that asks? Keep letting your state be determined by whatever happens around you? Keep operating from the same patterns that have been draining you for years? The choice, as it's always been, is yours. Nobody can make it for you. Nobody can force you to change, but nobody can stop you either. This is entirely within your control. So choose, and then live that choice. Make it real through your actions, not just your intentions. Let it transform how you actually move through life, not just how you think about moving through life. Because that's where the power is, not in knowing, in doing, not in understanding, in practicing, not in agreeing with these ideas, in living them. Make it count.